blizzard roared, burying the streets under layers of unforgiving snow. A tiny, golden-furred puppy, no more than a few weeks old, staggered through the freezing storm, his paws trembling, his breath shallow. His mother was gone, and now he had no one. The cold gnawed at his fragile body, whispering that it was time to give up. Then, from the shadows of an alley, a pair of glowing green eyes emerged. A mother cat. But what she did next, no one could have expected it. Backhand index pointing right if you believe in kindness beyond species. Hit like, share this story, and subscribe. Let us know where you're watching from. The storm had come without warning. One moment, the city was enduring a typical winter evening, the air crisp but bearable. The next, a furious blizzard descended, blanketing the streets in a suffocating white haze. The wind howled through the abandoned alleyways, rattling broken window panes and slamming against the brick walls of long-forgotten buildings. Streetlights flickered weakly against the relentless force of nature, their dim glow barely piercing the thick sheets of snow swirling through the air. The roads, the rooftops, the very essence of the city, all swallowed by ice and silence. In the heart of this frozen wasteland, a tiny, frail creature shivered against the biting cold. A lone puppy, barely past infancy, lay curled in a shallow recess between two dumpsters. His fur, once soft and golden, was now patchy and matted, clinging to his gaunt frame. Each breath he took was a struggle, his body trembling violently as snowflakes clung to his damp nose. His ribs, sharp beneath his fragile skin, rose and fell in shallow gasps. The puppy whimpered softly, a sound almost lost to the storm. His mother had been gone for weeks. The memories of her warmth were fleeting now, blurred by hunger and exhaustion. He had clung to her lifeless body for as long as he could, willing her to wake, to nuzzle him close the way she once had. But warmth had left her eyes, and her body had stiffened beneath the snow. Eventually, the hunger had won. He had stumbled away from the only home he had ever known, into the unforgiving unknown. Now the puppy fought to stay awake. The cold was like a living thing, wrapping around him, whispering cruel promises of relief if he would only close his eyes. He wanted to give in. His tiny legs had sunk deep into the snow every time he tried to move, and each step had been an agony. He had searched for food, for shelter, for anything, but there was nothing but ice and wind. A gust of wind tore through the alley, lifting a layer of powdery snow and tossing it over the puppy's body. He whined, trying to shake it off, but his movements were slow, sluggish. The snow was piling higher, as if the blizzard sought to bury him, to erase his existence beneath its weight. His heart hammered weakly, his vision blurred at the edges. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled sound of footsteps crunched against the thick snow. The puppy barely registered them. The storm was too fierce, the world too vast, and he was so small. Then warmth. A gloved hand brushed the snow away from his frail body. The puppy blinked slowly, his vision focusing on a shadow kneeling beside him. A human. The voice that followed was low and gentle, barely audible over the storm. "Hey, little guy." The words carried something unfamiliar. Concern. The puppy tried to lift his head, but the effort was too much. He had nothing left to give. The figure wasted no time, scooping him up with careful hands, pressing his tiny, trembling body against a thick coat. The sudden warmth was overwhelming. The puppy let out a weak, broken whimper before the exhaustion won. When the puppy woke, the world was different. The wind still howled, but it no longer reached him. Instead, there was warmth. A thick woolen blanket wrapped around him, soft and unfamiliar. The air smelled different too, not of snow and ice, but of something rich and comforting. The scent of wood, burning somewhere nearby, mixed with something that made his empty stomach clench in longing. He lifted his head weakly, his muscles aching in protest. The room was small, cozy. A fireplace crackled in the corner, its golden light dancing along the wooden walls. The storm still raged outside, rattling against the windows, but in here, it was safe, warm. He turned his head slightly, And there, seated a few feet away, was the human. The same one who had lifted him from the snow. The man was older, his face lined with years of experience, his beard streaked with silver. He was tending to a small pot over the fire, the rich scent of stew filling the room. The man must have sensed he was awake because he turned, his eyes softening when they met the puppy's. "Well, look who decided to wake up." His voice was warm, steady. The puppy flinched instinctively, pressing himself further into the blanket, but the man didn't move closer. He simply observed, his movements slow and non-threatening. "You gave me quite a scare out there," the man continued, stirring the pot absently. "Didn't think you were going to make it." The puppy didn't understand the words, but the tone was soothing. Not sharp like the voices he had sometimes heard in the city. Not cruel. The man rose slowly, ladling some of the steaming liquid into a shallow bowl before setting it down a few feet away. He stepped back, giving space. "Go on if you're hungry." The puppy hesitated. His body was screaming for food, but years of survival had taught him to be wary. His dark eyes flickered between the man and the bowl. The hunger won. With slow, tentative movements, he uncurled himself from the blanket and limped toward the bowl. The heat of the stew was intoxicating, its aroma rich and thick. He lapped at it greedily, the warmth spreading through his frozen insides. The man watched in silence, offering no sudden movements. When the puppy had eaten his fill, he backed away, retreating to the safety of the blanket. The warmth was still so new, so foreign. He didn't understand it, but he clung to it. The man gave a small nod, as if understanding something unspoken. "You're safe now, little guy." The puppy didn't know what the words meant, but for the first time in weeks he felt something other than cold and hunger. He felt safe. Outside, the blizzard raged on, its fury unrelenting. But inside, within the quiet warmth of the small cabin, a lonely puppy had finally found shelter. And perhaps he had found something more. A home. The storm raged on, consuming everything in its path. The once busy city streets were now buried under thick layers of snow, abandoned cars frozen in place, their windows frosted over like the cold, unblinking eyes of ghosts. The wind howled between the buildings, rattling street signs and whistling through narrow alleyways, a chilling symphony of isolation and despair. Somewhere amidst the storm, a small, golden-furred puppy wandered, his fragile body barely visible against the swirling white. His once lustrous coat was now damp and clumped together, coated with tiny icicles that clung to his fur like cruel ornaments. He had been alone for days, his tiny paws leaving shallow imprints in the snow as he trudged forward, driven only by instinct. His stomach growled painfully, an aching emptiness gnawing at his insides. Hunger was a constant companion, a shadow that followed him wherever he went, whispering its cruel reminders that his last meal had been nothing more than scraps of frozen garbage. His legs trembled beneath him, but he refused to stop. Stopping meant giving in. Stopping meant freezing. And freezing meant never waking up again. The city, once a place of warmth and light, had become a frozen wasteland, devoid of comfort. He had passed silent storefronts, their glass cracked and splattered with frost. He had pressed his tiny nose against a restaurant door once, hoping for a lingering scent of food, but the place was empty. There were no humans, no friendly hands to scoop him up, no kind voices to call him inside, just the endless, uncaring cold. He kept moving. He had to. Then, through the haze of snow, something appeared in the distance. A dark shape against the white. The puppy stopped, ears perking despite the numbness creeping through his body. His heart, weak as it was, beat a little faster. Was it food? Was it danger? He squinted against the wind, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His legs wobbled as he forced himself closer. The shape remained unmoving. His tiny paws, already stiff from the cold, pressed against the snow, dragging him forward. The wind roared past him, screaming in his ears, but he ignored it. And then, finally, he was close enough to see. It was small, fragile, a tiny body, curled up in the snow, half buried beneath the icy powder. Soft fur, now stiff with frost, was barely visible under the layers of white. Kitten. The puppy's heart clenched in his chest. He whined softly, his voice lost to the wind, as he took another unsteady step forward. His small nose nudged the kitten gently, hoping for a response, hoping for warmth. But there was none. The kitten didn't stir. The puppy whined again, pressing his nose against the little body. The snow clung to his muzzle, but he didn't care. He nudged the kitten once more desperate this time. Still nothing. Panic gripped his tiny heart. He had been alone for so long. Too long. He couldn't bear to see another small creature taken by the cold. Desperation gave him strength. He licked the kitten's face, his warm breath brushing against the frozen fur. His tail, though weak, wagged slightly, urging the kitten to move. And then a twitch, the tiniest movement, a shudder that was barely there. The puppy froze, hope blooming in his chest. He nudged again, this time with more urgency. A faint sound escaped the kitten's mouth. A weak, breathy mewl. The puppy barked, a tiny, broken sound. Relief flooded him, and without thinking, he curled his tiny body around the kitten, pressing his warmth against the smaller creature. The kitten stirred slightly, its fragile frame trembling beneath him. Its fur was just as cold as his, its tiny paws stiff with frost. The puppy whimpered, licking its face again, trying to share whatever warmth he had left. The snow piled higher around them, the blizzard showing no mercy. But the puppy didn't move. He would not leave. Not again. Not this time. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had lost meaning in the cold. The puppy's body ached, but he remained curled around the kitten, shielding it as best as he could. Every so often, the kitten would let out a tiny sound, a fragile mew that barely rose above the storm, but it was a sign of life. The puppy clung to that sound. His breathing slowed. His strength was fading. He couldn't stay like this forever. He needed to find shelter, not just for himself, but for the tiny life he had found. But where? His vision blurred with exhaustion, the cold seeping into his very bones. His paws ached. His stomach screamed in protest, but he forced himself to move. He gently took the kitten's scruff in his mouth, lifting it as carefully as his weak body allowed. It was light, too light. He took a step. His legs wobbled dangerously. He almost collapsed then and there, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself forward. One step, then another, and another. Each step was agony. The snow fought against him, the wind pushing him back, but he refused to stop. He carried the kitten, his breath coming out in ragged puffs of white mist. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to go. Then, through the blinding whiteness, something appeared in the distance. A building. Small, half-buried in snow, but still standing. Hope flickered in his tired heart. He pushed forward, his tiny body trembling with effort. The door was slightly open, the storm having forced its way inside. He squeezed through the gap, the warmth, or at least the lack of wind, a shocking relief. The room was dark, abandoned, but it was better than the blizzard outside. There were broken chairs, an old counter covered in dust, shelves that had long since been emptied. But in the corner, there was an old blanket. Torn, dirty, but thick. The puppy didn't hesitate. He carried the kitten to the blanket, gently setting it down before curling around it once more. The warmth wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The kitten shivered against him, letting out another weak mewl. The puppy licked its forehead softly. For the first time in days, he allowed his eyes to close. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was the kitten. When the puppy woke, the storm had finally begun to die down. The wind had lessened, the blizzard no longer howling with rage. Through a crack in the ceiling, faint sunlight peeked through, casting a soft glow onto the frozen floor. He stretched slightly, feeling the stiffness in his limbs, but there was warmth now. Not just from the blanket, but from the tiny body still nestled against him. The kitten was awake. Its tiny eyes, half-lidded with exhaustion, stared up at him. Its ears twitched slightly, its frail body still trembling but alive. The puppy wagged his tail weakly, letting out a soft whimper. The kitten blinked. Then, slowly, it pressed its tiny nose against his. A silent understanding passed between them. The storm had tried to take them, but they had survived. Together, and together they would keep surviving. For as long as they could. The wind roared like a living beast, howling through the empty city streets. Snow swirled in thick, suffocating waves, covering everything in an unyielding white prison. The buildings, once towering and strong, now stood as lifeless husks, their windows coated in ice, their doors frozen shut. In the alley, the small family huddled together, their tiny bodies pressed close for warmth. The mother cat curled protectively around the golden-furred puppy, her tail wrapped tightly over his frail body. Her kittens nestled beside her, their soft purrs barely audible over the shrieking wind. The night was merciless. The snow had already begun to pile higher, creeping into their fragile shelter beneath the wooden shed. The mother cat's keen eyes flicked toward the alley's entrance. The snow was rising fast. Soon it would seal them in completely. They could not stay here. They had survived the storm for now, but if they remained much longer, the alley would become their grave. She knew this, but moving in this blizzard was nearly impossible. The puppy trembled against her, his body still recovering from the brutal cold. He was too weak to walk far, too fragile to survive another night exposed. And her kittens, they were just babies, soft, helpless. She had already lost too much in this world. She would not lose them. Her sharp green eyes scanned the alley for options, her instincts screaming at her to act before it was too late. They needed food. They needed warmth. But above all, they needed shelter. Somewhere safe. Somewhere permanent. But where? The city had long since abandoned creatures like them. The towering buildings held no comfort, their doors locked, their windows sealed. Yet she had no choice. She had to move, even if it meant risking everything. She looked down at the golden puppy, his tiny breath slow but steady. He had survived against all odds, and she would make sure he continued to survive. With a deep breath, the mother cat made her decision. They would leave before the night swallowed them whole. The kittens mewled in protest as their mother nudged them awake. They were warm, comfortable, unwilling to move, but she did not give them a choice. She lifted one by the scruff of his neck, carrying him gently before setting him down near the alley's exit. The others, still drowsy, followed her movement instinctively, their tiny paws sinking into the thick snow. The puppy stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open. He let out a soft whimper as the cold bit into him again, but he did not resist when the mother cat nudged him forward with her nose. He trusted her. She was all he had. The mother cat took the lead, her paws pressing deep into the snow. It was not easy. Her fur, damp from the night's frost, weighed her down, and the biting wind burned against her skin. But she did not stop. Her kittens followed close behind, their movements sluggish but determined. The golden puppy stumbled at first, his legs weak from exhaustion. But he pushed forward, his tiny paws sinking with every step. They were slow, but they were moving, and that was enough. The city was silent beneath the storm, the roads buried, the buildings looming like frozen giants. No sound but the wind, no life but their own. The mother cat kept her eyes sharp, searching, watching. Then she saw it. A faint light, barely visible through the thick snowfall. It flickered weakly, but it was real. A sign of life, shelter, hope. With newfound determination, she pressed forward, guiding her small family toward salvation. The journey was treacherous. The snow swallowed their tiny bodies, forcing them to climb with every step. The alley had been difficult, but out here, exposed to the open streets, the storm was relentless. The golden puppy collapsed twice, his strength failing him. Each time, the mother cat nudged him back to his feet, urging him onward. Her kittens cried softly, their fur wet with ice, their tiny tails dragging through the snow. The mother cat felt her heart clench. They could not go on like this for much longer. She turned her head back toward the light in the distance. It was closer now, but still too far. Her body ached, her limbs numb from the cold. But she could not stop. She would not stop. Not when her family's survival depended on her. With one last surge of strength, she pressed forward, willing her body to move faster. The wind howled louder, as if trying to keep them from reaching safety. The mother cat's eyes burned against the cold, her breath sharp and heavy. Then finally she saw it. A building, its entrance slightly ajar, the light from within spilling faintly into the night. Warmth, food, a chance to live. She let out a sharp meow, her voice barely carrying over the storm. The kittens, shivering but hopeful, pushed forward with what little strength they had left. The golden puppy stumbled beside them, his breath ragged. They were almost there, just a little further. The mother cat led the way, slipping through the narrow opening. Warmth washed over her instantly, a stark contrast to the freezing night outside. She turned, her green eyes wide as she watched her kittens squeeze inside one by one, their tiny bodies shaking from exhaustion. Then came the puppy. He tried to follow, his paws dragging weakly against the snow. But the storm was not ready to let him go. A sudden gust of wind slammed into him, sending his frail body backward. The mother cat's eyes widened. She acted on instinct. Darting back into the cold, she grabbed the puppy by the scruff of his neck. Her teeth clenched tightly around his fur, her muscles burning as she pulled him forward. The wind pushed against her, the snow clinging to her body like shackles. But she did not let go. With a final, desperate pull, she yanked him inside. The wind screamed in protest, but it was too late. The door slammed shut, sealing them away from the merciless storm. The silence was deafening. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no howling wind, no biting frost, no endless struggle. Only warmth. The golden puppy lay sprawled on the floor, his tiny body rising and falling with shallow breaths. His fur was damp, his paws red from the cold, but he was alive. The kittens huddled beside him, their tiny bodies pressing close, sharing warmth. The mother cat stood over them all, her sharp green eyes scanning their surroundings. They were inside an old, abandoned warehouse. Rusted shelves lined the walls, scattered wooden crates stacked in uneven piles. Dust floated lazily in the air, the faint scent of something warm lingering nearby. Food. The mother cat's muscles relaxed. They had made it. They had survived the night. The golden puppy stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at the mother cat, his body still weak but his eyes filled with something new. Trust, gratitude, love. The mother cat licked his forehead gently, a silent promise passing between them. She had saved him once, and she would continue to save him. Because in this cold, unforgiving world, family was all they had, and no matter what lay ahead, she would never abandon him. Never. The night had been long, bitter, and unrelenting. But as the first golden rays of dawn peeked through the frozen skyline, the storm finally began to loosen its grip. The furious wind that had howled through the streets had settled into a quiet, eerie stillness. Snow blanketed everything in a thick, undisturbed layer, transforming the city into a frozen wasteland. The world seemed asleep, motionless, except for the small, fragile lives clinging to survival. Inside the shell of an abandoned warehouse, warmth had slowly returned to the tiny, makeshift family. The mother cat, her fur still damp from the storm, curled around her kittens protectively. They nestled against her, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each steady breath. And beside them, shivering but alive, was the golden-furred puppy. He had survived the brutal night, but his body still ached from the cold. His paws, raw from the ice, twitched as he stirred. He wasn't sure how long he had been asleep, only that the warmth of the mother cat had kept him from freezing. But as the light grew, so did the mother cat's urgency. She knew this shelter was temporary. This place had protected them from the storm, but it was no home. The scent of decay lingered in the air, and the wind still howled through cracks in the walls. No food, no certainty, no true safety. She had already lost too much. She would not lose them. Her kittens were too small to understand danger, but she understood it well. And so, as the first hints of morning stretched across the snow-covered alleyways, She knew. It was time to move. She licked each of her kittens, their tiny bodies warm and trusting beneath her touch. They did not yet know fear, but she had lived in fear all her life. Fear had made her strong. Fear had kept her alive, and now it would help her save them all. One by one, she picked up her kittens. One by one, she carried them away. The journey had begun. The cold was sharp, but the mother cat pressed on, cradling her kitten in her jaws as she moved swiftly through the alleyways. She had chosen her new hiding place carefully, a narrow wooden crate wedged between two buildings, just large enough to provide shelter, but hidden from human eyes. Each trip was a risk. Each step left her vulnerable, but she had no choice. One by one, she carried her kittens to safety, and each time she left, the golden puppy remained behind, watching. At first, he didn't understand what she was doing. Then he realized she was taking them away. Each time she left, his heart pounded in fear that she wouldn't return. Each time she came back, he whimpered softly, relieved. He wanted to follow. He wanted to go with her, but he knew she wasn't ready to take him. Not yet, and so he waited. And when she returned for the last time, her yellow eyes met his. Now it was his turn. The golden puppy was different. Unlike her tiny kittens, he was bigger, too big for her to carry. His paws, still stiff from the cold, trembled as he tried to stand. His legs wobbled, but he didn't look away from her. She stepped toward him, nudging his side gently. Come. The puppy let out a soft, uncertain whimper. His body was weak. His stomach ached with hunger. Every movement sent pain through his frozen limbs. But he trusted her. She had saved him once. She would not lead him astray. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. The snow was deep, and with every step, his legs sank. His paws burned from the cold, but he pushed forward, following the mother cat's lead. He was not fast, but he was moving, and for now that was enough. The city was eerily silent. The streets, usually filled with human life, were now covered in white. No moving cars, no flashing lights, just the whisper of the wind and the crunch of tiny paws pressing through the snow. The mother cat stayed ahead, her tail flicking as she checked their surroundings. Danger was always near. She knew this too well, and she would not let it find them. As they passed through the empty streets, the golden puppy began to slow. His breath came in short, heavy bursts. His legs ached, exhaustion creeping into his small body. He was not like the mother cat. He had never known survival like this. He had never fought against the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. Not until now. The mother cat turned, watching as he lowered himself onto the icy ground. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his small frame shivering. He was tired, too tired, but they could not stop. Not here. Not now. She stepped closer, rubbing her warm body against his, licking the snow from his fur. He whimpered but lifted his head, his weary eyes meeting hers. He had to keep going. She nudged him again, firmer this time. Come. And slowly, painfully, he obeyed. The journey was long, longer than it should have been. But the mother cat had chosen a place well hidden. A shelter, one she hoped would last longer than the last. The wooden crate was tucked against the side of an abandoned shop, shielded from the worst of the wind. The opening was just large enough for her and her kittens to slip inside. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. The golden puppy stumbled behind her, his breath shallow. Then, finally, they made it. The mother cat slipped inside first, her kittens mewling in greeting. She turned, waiting. The golden puppy stood just outside, his body shaking from exhaustion. He had made it this far, but he was scared. Scared to go inside. Scared that, once again, he would be alone. The mother cat stepped forward, rubbing her body against his side. A reassurance. Promise. And slowly, he took one final step forward, crawling inside the crate. The moment he collapsed onto the soft pile of cloth she had gathered, the mother cat curled around him, wrapping her body over his the way she did with her kittens. For the first time since the storm began, they were all together. They were all safe. And as the golden puppy closed his tired eyes, his breathing finally slowing. He knew he had found a family, and he would never be alone again. The morning sun stretched lazily across the frozen city, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered streets. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet, haunting stillness. Smoke curled from distant chimneys, but the alleyways remained empty, undisturbed except for the occasional gust of wind swirling the loose powder into tiny, twisting ghosts. But amidst this winter silence, a small, fragile world stirred within a wooden crate wedged between two buildings. Inside, the mother cat lay curled protectively around her family. Her warmth kept them safe, her presence a constant reassurance. Her kittens nestled into her belly, their tiny paws twitching in sleep. The golden-furred puppy, still weak but alive, pressed close against her side. She had not intended to take him in. He was not hers. And yet, something deep inside her had told her otherwise. She had lost too much in her life. Too many nights spent fighting for food. Too many days hiding from danger. She had watched others suffer and disappear, helpless against the cruelty of the world. This time she had chosen to fight back. This time she had chosen to protect. And so, even as the city slowly awakened, even as the dangers of the day crept closer, she remained still, keeping her tiny, makeshift family hidden from the world. What she did not know, however, was that the world had already found her. A few blocks away, a woman stood near the entrance of a small bakery, brushing snow off the steps. She was bundled in layers of warm clothes, a thick scarf wrapped around her face, but her sharp brown eyes missed nothing. She had lived in this neighborhood for years. She knew its secrets, its shadows. She knew the stray animals that roamed its streets, the old tomcat that slept near the bookstore, the limping dog that wandered near the market. She knew them all, and she cared for them. Every morning, before the city was truly awake, she would step outside with a small bag of food tucked under her arm, scattering it in the quiet corners of the alleyways. Sometimes, the braver ones would creep forward, their eyes cautious but hopeful. Sometimes, she would see a new face, a fresh pair of wary eyes staring back at her. But today she saw something she had never seen before. At first, it was just a movement in the alley, a flash of golden fur against the snow. She squinted, stepping closer. A puppy? Alone? No. Her heart clenched as she saw a small, black and white figure slinking behind him. A cat. And not just any cat, a mother cat. But what stunned her most wasn't the mother cat's presence. It was the way she moved, staying close, circling protectively, her sharp eyes scanning the alley like a sentry. And when the puppy stumbled, exhausted, she watched in astonishment as the cat nudged him forward, guiding him just as she did her kittens. The woman sucked in a sharp breath. She had seen stray animals form unlikely bonds before, but never like this. Never a cat taking in a puppy as her own. What had happened to them? Where had they come from? And most importantly, how long had they been struggling to survive alone? For a long moment, the woman simply watched. She knew better than to rush forward. Strays were cautious, especially mothers. Trust was not easily given, and she had learned that patience was key. Slowly, she knelt, reaching into the pocket of her coat. Her fingers brushed against the small bag of food she always carried. She tore it open, letting the scent drift into the air. The mother cat froze. The puppy, smelling food, perked up weakly, his tail wagging just slightly. The woman's heart ached at the sight of him. He was too thin, too weak. He had been fighting the cold for too long. She had to help them. Taking a deep breath, she called out softly, "Hey there, little ones. You hungry?" The mother cat's ears flattened. Her muscles tensed, ready to grab her kittens and disappear into the shadows. The woman knew that look well. She was ready to run. And if she ran, she would never come back. The woman didn't move closer. Instead, she carefully placed a handful of food on the snow, then took a step back. She waited and waited. The mother cat didn't move. But the puppy was too hungry to resist. His stomach let out a pitiful growl, and he took a hesitant step forward, his nose twitching. He sniffed the food, glanced back at the mother cat, then took a bite. The woman smiled, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. "That's it, little guy," she murmured. "Go on." The mother cat let out a soft, warning growl, but she didn't stop him. That was enough for the woman to have hope. She reached into her pocket again, and this time, she didn't just offer food. She extended her hand, a silent invitation, a chance. Would the mother cat take it? Would she trust a human? Or would she choose the cold streets once more? The mother cat's body remained rigid. Her sharp yellow eyes flicked between the woman's hand and the puppy, who was now eagerly licking up every last crumb of food. She had never trusted humans. She had seen what they could do. She had learned that their kindness was not always real, that a gentle touch could turn into something cruel, that a warm home could turn into a cage. She had fought too hard to lose her freedom. And yet, she looked at her kittens, tiny and fragile, curled up in the wooden crate. She looked at the puppy, weak but alive, pressing close to her for warmth. She had done everything she could to keep them safe. But was it enough? She had survived the winter before. But could they? Her tail twitched uncertainly. The woman was still there, waiting. She had not moved. She had not forced them. She had simply offered a choice. The mother cat took a slow, cautious step forward. The woman didn't move. Another step. Her nose twitched, catching the scent of warmth, of something safe, something soft. Then, hesitantly, she brushed her head against the woman's outstretched fingers. A quiet, gentle touch. And in that moment, everything changed. The woman let out a slow breath, her eyes filled with relief. She didn't rush, didn't try to pick the mother cat up. Instead, she slowly stood, stepping back toward the open door of her shop. "It's warm inside," she said softly. "There's more food. You don't have to stay. But if you want to..." She gestured to the doorway. Then, without another word, she stepped inside, leaving the door open. The mother cat stood motionless, staring at the warm glow spilling from within. It was a risk, but so was staying here. She turned, glancing back at the puppy, at her kittens. They needed her. They needed more than what she could give alone. And so, she made her choice. With slow, careful steps, she led her family forward. One by one, they stepped through the door. One by one, they left the cold behind. And as the door closed gently behind them, the world outside no longer mattered. They were safe. They were warm. They had found something they never thought possible. A home. And for the first time in her life, the mother cat allowed herself to believe. It was a crisp winter morning when the mother cat finally made her way to the doorstep. Her coat, once glossy and smooth, was now matted and dusted with dirt. But there was something in her eyes, a calm, knowing look, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. As she stepped inside, she carefully led her kittens in, their small bodies following her movements with an innocence that only young creatures have. Behind them, a puppy, just a few months old, shuffled nervously inside the warm room. He had never known such comfort. His paws hesitated on the threshold, unsure of what awaited him inside. Yet, something deep within him sensed that this was where he belonged. His tail wagged slowly as he stepped in, cautiously sniffing the air. The warmth that enveloped him was unlike anything he had felt before. It wasn't just the physical warmth from the heater, it was the kind of warmth that comes from a safe place, a place where love and kindness flowed freely. The woman who had opened her home to these stray animals stood in the corner, watching them quietly. Her heart swelled with emotion as she observed the family she had just brought together. For a moment, everything stood still. The only sound in the room was the soft rustling of fur as the mother cat nudged her kittens to explore their new surroundings. The puppy's eyes flickered between them, unsure of what to do but drawn to them nonetheless. She had found them by the side of the road, desperate, hungry, and frightened. The mother cat had been trying to protect her kittens, and the puppy, though only a pup, had been abandoned and left to fend for himself. She couldn't turn them away. They needed her, and in that moment she knew she needed them too. There was no hesitation when she opened her door to them. They had no home, no family, but now they would. That first night, the woman set up a cozy bed near the fireplace. It was warm, soft, and smelled faintly of lavender. The cats curled up together in the corner, with the little puppy's head resting gently on the mother cat's side. The puppy, despite his own needs, seemed to find comfort in the presence of the mother cat. She watched over them all, her gentle purr filling the room like a lullaby. The warmth of the house felt foreign to the animals. They had spent so much time surviving on the streets, never knowing where the next meal would come from or where they would sleep. But here, in this little corner of the world, they were safe. And in that safety, something began to grow: trust. The mother cat, despite all the hardships she had faced, opened her heart to these strangers. She allowed herself to rest, knowing her kittens were finally protected. The puppy, who had spent so many nights alone, snuggled up to the kittens. They were all so different in size, in species, but at that moment they were the same. They were all part of the same family. The kitten, despite their playful and independent nature, felt the warmth and safety of their new surroundings, realizing that they were no longer alone. They had each other now. Days turned into weeks, and the once hesitant puppy began to blossom in the safety of his new home. He no longer felt the constant gnawing hunger that had once been his only companion. The puppies and kittens, now growing stronger and more playful, spent hours running around the living room, chasing each other and tumbling over furniture. Their laughter, or rather, the sound of their playful antics, echoed in the house. The woman could hardly contain her joy as she watched them grow closer with every passing day. The puppy had quickly become inseparable from the kittens. He would chase after them, his paws slipping on the hardwood floors as he tried to keep up with their quick little legs. The kittens, though much smaller than him, were just as fast, darting under the furniture and climbing onto high places that the puppy could never reach. It wasn't long before they learned to work together. They would team up to knock over stacks of pillows or race to the back door, barking and meowing in unison. It was a sight to behold, this unexpected family, formed from the most unlikely of circumstances. The once lonely, abandoned animals had found each other. The love they had for one another had nothing to do with what they were, or where they had come from. It was pure, unconditional love, the kind that transcends species and backgrounds. The woman couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of it all. How is it possible, she thought, that in this small corner of the world, these animals so different could form a bond so strong? Though the playful chaos filled the house, there was one constant: the mother cat. She still watched over them all with a protective yet gentle eye. She knew that the puppy had found its place among the kittens, and though she had every right to be wary of this new addition, she welcomed him into their family without hesitation. She had known hardship and struggle, but in this moment, she was at peace. Her purrs resonated softly through the house, signaling her calm presence, while the puppy would often nuzzle against her, seeking comfort and affection. The kittens, who had once been so independent, now relied on her guidance and warmth. They followed her everywhere, learning from her, growing under her watchful eye. Even as they became more independent, they knew their mother would always be there, her love unyielding and unwavering. And so, day after day, this unconventional family grew closer. The puppy had learned to trust not only the woman but also the mother cat, who taught him the ways of family. The kittens, no longer fearful or lost, now had a sense of belonging that they had never experienced before. They had a home, a real home, and a family that loved them. Time passed, and the puppy and kittens continued to play together, inseparable in every sense of the word. The once shy, reserved puppy was now a playful ball of energy. The kittens had developed their own unique personalities, each one bringing something special to the family dynamic. They had all found their place, and in their own way, they were teaching each other lessons about love, loyalty, and trust. As the months went by, the family continued to thrive. The house, once quiet and empty, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, meowing, and barking. The warmth of love radiated through the walls, and there was no longer any question about where they belonged. They were a family that had formed not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something more meaningful. They had all been saved in different ways by each other. But no matter how much time passed, the mother cat remained the silent protector. Her love for her family was something fierce, something that couldn't be measured. She had given them a gift that couldn't be repaid. A love that had no boundaries, no limits. A love that simply was. How did this story make you feel? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more heartwarming stories like this. Share this video with your friends to spread the love. Join our community, and let's celebrate the power of family and love, no matter how unconventional it may be.